All right, everybody, we are back. We are continuing along in our three-part series on the major ideologies of human civilization. We have just finished episode 2 in our three-part series, and we are now moving to the final episode in this three-part series, and that is episode number 3. So we left off on episode number 2, discussing the era and corresponding philosophy of the Islamic Golden Age. Now, from there, we are moving on to the next major era and corresponding worldview. And this is an era that can arguably be said to have laid the foundation for the world as we know it today. And that is the era of the Renaissance and the worldview and ideology and belief system of Renaissance philosophy. So kind of in the same way that Islamic Golden Age philosophy kind of took the principles of Islam and then used Greek's philosophy's logic and dialogue and debate and dialectic to argue the points of Islam, Renaissance philosophy did the same thing, but for Christianity. So they took this Greek philosophy and argued points for the existence of God. If we're going to reference Thomas Aquinas's 5 points for the existence of God, he just very logically described from a very kind of objective, scientific viewpoint how we could possibly argue for the existence of God. He was probably the most well-known philosopher of the Renaissance. Another major philosopher of the Renaissance who, just like we talked about in Islamic Golden Age, some people kind of strayed a little bit from orthodoxy. This was a philosopher who strayed big time from orthodoxy, and that is Machiavelli. A lot of you may recognize that name from Tupac's alter ego, but he was an Italian prince, and he wrote a book called The Prince about pretty much how to govern, and many people in our society view it almost as kind of very ruthless. The term Machiavellian comes from this. He pretty much believed that everybody has their own opinion of what's right and what's the right way to live, and then if a certain king were to try to impose their idea of what's the right way to live on the people, they eventually would fail, the people would revolt, they would be so guided by moralism that they're not going to tend to the actual practical issues that are facing them. If kings were to govern purely based on morality and ideology, they would be ineffective, they wouldn't be looking at the practicalities in front of them. And he said that you have to know when to be forceful and when to be cunning. You have to know when to be the lion and when to be the fox, right? And this was very influential in another ideology, which we will discuss a little bit later. So those were two of the main thinkers of the Renaissance. And it should be noted, like I said, this was almost like the Christian version of the philosophy which emerged during the Islamic Golden Age. And, it is believed by many, if not the majority, or all, historians and religious scholars and whatnot, that the Renaissance was influenced by the Islamic Golden Age. So during the Crusades, of course, the Crusaders set up lots of kingdoms in the Middle East, and there they got their hands on a lot of Greek philosophy books that had been translated into Arabic and various other languages, and they brought those books with them back home to Europe. Also, during the Reconquista of Spain, when the Catholics regained control of Spain, like I said, the philosopher Averroes or Ibn Rushd, he actually was from Muslim Spain, right? So Spain, specifically the city of Toledo and Granada as well, were centers of Islamic thought. So once the Catholics regained control of Spain, they got their hands on a lot of these philosophy books that had been translated into various languages when Spain was under Muslim rule, and then they used Greek philosophy to argue for their Christian beliefs. And of course, most people are aware of the major impact that the Renaissance had on Europe. It was a time of prosperity in Europe, a time of great wealth, time of great knowledge, and it's what's believed to have brought Europe out of the Dark Ages. Another major figure which is widely considered to be a part of the same era of the Renaissance is Martin Luther, who is famous for initiating the Protestant Reformation. with his Protestant Reformation, he challenged the authority of the Catholic Church and the Pope and put forth a number of criticisms of the Catholic Church. He criticized their singular hold on authority, where there's, just one hierarchy that goes all the way up to the Pope. He criticized certain practices such as baptism of infants. He was critical of their heavy reliance on ritual as a whole. And he preached the idea that salvation is through faith, your belief, rather than your works, as he called them, or your deeds. He also was very critical of a lot of what he considered to be the corruption of the Catholic Church, their acceptance of money, in which he believed they were enriching themselves with. So, of course, he was also a figure in history who had a profound impact on the development of the Western world. So that is Renaissance philosophy. Now we'll move to another ideology, one that's a little bit further in a different geographical direction, and that is Sikhism. So Sikhism emerged in India. Its foundation began in the 1400s under the religious figure who Sikhs believe is a Guru Nanak. And then following him, he had various successors who were from his same lineage. But in essence, how most religious scholars would define Sikhism is almost like a reconciliation of Islam and Hinduism. So, of course, during that time, India was under Islamic rule. So, of course, you had a large Muslim population as well as a large Hindu population. And Sikhism can be argued to be a reconciliation of these two different belief systems. So Sikhism believes in the concepts which are present in Hinduism, which is reincarnation, karma, your next life being influenced by your previous life. So it has those concepts which are present in Hinduism. And they also hold the Vedas of Hinduism to be authoritative, or to be a divine holy source. And also from the influence of Islam, they have the belief in monotheism. So in essence, Sikhism is monotheism with the belief in reincarnation. And all of these beliefs were passed down by the various gurus who had continued through the lineage of Guru Nanak, and they were finally written down in the 1700s in the Sikh holy book, which is called the Guru Granth Sahib. And it should be noted that in Sikhism, it is viewed as kind of a reconciliation and a merging of, beliefs within Islam as well as Hinduism. But according to Sikh beliefs, they do not consider themselves to have been a successor to Islam. They believe that Islam and Christianity and Judaism are almost kind of, different unrelated religions, and they believe that their religion is the next stage in what was previously Hinduism. Like I said, they accept the authority of the Vedas, the Veda scriptures, and they believe that in the Veda scriptures, there is a case to be argued for the existence of monotheism. So they can say that their monotheism is not borrowed from Islam, but in fact it can be justified within the Vedas. So that is Sikhism. And we are just at the tail end of it. So we got our final few ideologies. And the next major ideology that has had a profound impact on the world. I talked before about Christianity, the ideology that would fall into the category of religion that has the biggest impact. This could be argued, and I would even say maybe not even argue, could maybe be objectively stated so, that this is the dominant ideology in the world, and that is Enlightenment philosophy, otherwise known as modernity. Of course, we're living in the modern world, so our current modern world is based upon Enlightenment philosophy and modernity. So in essence, what this was, it was a continuation of the Renaissance, but it was going a little bit further in a particular direction. So we talked about how the Islamic Golden Age philosophy and the Renaissance philosophy took that Greek philosophy with their logic and their reason and their dialogue, debating and searching for the truth, being objective, etc., took that philosophy and used it to justify Islam and then Christianity respectively. Well, Enlightenment philosophy moved in a little bit different direction. So they moved away from using that philosophy to justify various Abrahamic religions and moved more towards its core root in Greek philosophy. So while they emerged in an environment that was the Christian world at the time, Europe, their focus was more on Greek philosophy. Their core message was more aligned with Greek philosophy than with Christianity. Enlightenment philosophy discussed the concepts of democracy. So the roots of democracy are in Athens in the classical period of Greek history. However, as we know it today, democracy as we saw it in Athens was primarily confined to Athens. Even when the Greek world spread far beyond Greece, it did not spread. It was largely a phenomenon within Athens. So Enlightenment philosophy is the ideology that has popularized democracy, which has led to the democracies that we now have in the world today. So it spread this belief in democracy. It had this belief in almost like an inherent skepticism. You should question all authority, right? Question your political leaders. That's why we should have democracy, because you can't trust these kings to do the right thing on their own. We need rule by the people. We need checks and balances on the power of those in power. And also, going further in this whole idea of skepticism, we should question all beliefs that we have. Kind of like how Greek philosophy discussed using logic and reason to question your assumptions and kind of vetting everything until you can truly reach the truth. Enlightenment era philosophy reinvigorated this concept and led to the development of modern science as we know it. So science is largely built upon the concept that we can't just take something just for granted. We can't go and read in a particular holy book that the world is these many years old, or that this particular event, such as a flood or whatnot, happened. We should go and think critically, question it, look at the evidence, and try to find what truly happened based upon the evidence, not based upon somebody's word, somebody giving you their word for it, or not based upon going off of some sort of dogma, or holding something to be unquestionably true. They believe that everything should be questioned, but still they held to that concept that is prevalent within Greek philosophy, that if you question enough and you question, you observe your environment, and you test and you experiment and you use science, you can eventually reach this objective truth. So they believe that there is a truth out there which is objective, which can be found out, and you just have to think critically and look at things scientifically and use the scientific method and question things and test things and observe things, and from there you can reach the truth. And some of the major figures in Enlightenment era philosophy are Francis Bacon, who could arguably be called the father of the entire Enlightenment era. And he was famous for the profound accomplishment of developing the scientific method, as well as other great thinkers such as René Descartes, who is famous for coining the phrase, "I think, therefore I am," as well as Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, who is famous for developing the concept of the social contract, which had a profound influence and impact in the American Revolution and the development of the American Constitution by the Founding Fathers, and the concept of government by the people and for the people, as well as other notable figures such as David Hume and Immanuel Kant. So that is the dominant ideology of the world today, and that is Enlightenment philosophy. So now we have two final ideologies to discuss. And these are ideologies that have developed in the world that emerged as a result of the Enlightenment. So they can be said to have developed in modern times, right, in the modern world. But they can be viewed as almost like a reaction and a critique to modernity. I'm going to start with the one that, of course, it diverges from Enlightenment thought, but is the one that's not quite as big of a jump from it. And that is Marxism. So, within this modern world of the Enlightenment, certain institutions developed that included the institution of democracy, that also included the economic institution of capitalism, free market. According to Adam Smith, let the hand of God guide the market, right? So capitalism initially started as a movement away from feudalism. In feudalism, you had a few lords which owned all the land, and everybody in the world lived on the land that's owned by these lords, and they had to work, and all their work and money went to the lords, and the lords gave them some few measly crumbs. And initially, capitalism advocated, instead of having these lords, we're going to have a bunch of almost kind of like small entrepreneurs, right, whom they deemed the bourgeoisie. And these were just a bunch of small business people, whereby the stranglehold that feudalism had over the pre-modern world were almost breaking down this authority of these lords who controlled everything, and now everybody has a fair shot, right? That was the concept of capitalism. Well, Marx, he affirmed the initial core belief of capitalism. And this, a lot of people may not know this, because it's so much viewed that communism and capitalism are the antithesis to one another. But he viewed that, the goal is to democratize power, right? He was not opposed to this broad concept of rule by the people, which we now would call democracy. And he believed that capitalism started to move in the right direction, right? But he believed at the time of when he emerged in the 1800s, where we had industrialization, where we had the emergence of the assembly line, and we had all these factories which all these workers would work in and were owned by a few very rich, powerful people. He believed that capitalism was not moving far enough in the direction of giving power to the masses, and he probably even believed that at this point capitalism no longer possessed the same feature and the same spirit that this initial capitalism had, where we're taking away the power from the lords and giving it to every random Joe to get a fair shot. So he believed that we want to give power to the masses. We want to give power to the people. We want to give power to the workers. We don't want all these rich bourgeoisie to possess all of the power. So he almost took that term and kind of changed it. If you noticed, as I previously discussed, in early capitalism, the bourgeoisie were these kind of small entrepreneurs who were kind of given a fair chance, aside from, in comparison to these lords who controlled everything. But the way that Marx referred to the bourgeoisie, he almost referred to them as if they were the lords. These were these businessmen who controlled all the means of production, and he wanted the workers to gain control of the means of production. So, with that being said, him believing that capitalism was initially right, but believing that it needed to continue in that same direction, it's clear that Marxism was not, some foreign ideology that had nothing to do with capitalism, but in fact it emerged from capitalism. One could maybe even make the argument that Marxism came from capitalism in a similar way that Islam came from Christianity. Many Christians may view Islam as a religion not related to Christianity, just like many capitalists might view Marxism as an ideology not related to capitalism. But both of these ideologies emerged from their respective precursor ideology. So yeah, Marx, he believed giving power to the people. He believed workers having control of the means of production, democratization of power. The power is shared amongst everybody. He was egalitarian. He believed everybody should be equal. Everybody will share everything. We'll have a utopian world. And similar to the Enlightenment thought which he emerged from, his thought was not a religious type thought. So he didn't believe in a spiritual world. His belief system could be considered a quote-unquote materialist ideology, in the sense that it is dealing with the material world rather than the spiritual world. So his main goal, his main finish line, utopia, was not an afterlife as it is in the Abrahamic religions, but his utopian world was a utopian world on this world. We're living in a utopian society where everybody's equal. So, in line with that, the emphasis placed by religion on the afterlife instead of our life on earth caused him to famously state that religion is the opium of the masses, because from his view, religion led people to accept their undesirable conditions in this life through hope for a better set of conditions in the afterlife. So, that is Marxism. And that is one of the ideologies which has had a lot of influence in our modern times, and many can almost argue that it's in competition with the current dominant form of modernity as we see it in the world today, aside from the fact that it, of course, did emerge from modernity. So, now we're going to discuss the final ideology. It's the most recent, but it's also the most divergent from modernity. And to many people in our modern world today, it might even seem like the most hard to wrap your head around. And that is what is called postmodernism. So just by hearing that name, I think we can get a pretty good impression. It's moving away from modernity. It's moving forward. And unlike Marxism, which can be viewed as kind of the evolution of what began in the Enlightenment, postmodernity can be viewed as a rejection of modernity. So there are a lot of big postmodern philosophers, such as Michel Foucault, Sartre, which can all be said to have played a role in the development of postmodern thought. But this is a philosophy, unlike Enlightenment philosophy, where there's a clear person from which all of this emerged, and that was Friedrich Nietzsche. So Nietzsche, he lived in Germany, and based upon how he's described, he can be viewed to maybe have been a bit of a troubled individual. But his ideology was pretty much, there was a lot of things that he was rejecting and critiquing. He was rejecting and critiquing modernity. He was critiquing and rejecting Christianity. And his main core concept was he's rejecting what are considered objective truths. So he rejected the dogma of Christianity and religion in general, which believed that there's a singular source of authority, a divine holy book, which was revealed by a prophet-like figure or a messiah figure. And this book is the clear source of authority, and there are clear things that you're supposed to do and not do, and anybody who doesn't do what they're told to do or does what they're told to not do is condemned and is viewed as wicked. So his ideology was a rejection of that. It was also a rejection of modernity. He rejected the concept in modernity of objectivity. Modernity believed, okay, there's this objective truth, and then if we think enough and we analyze the environment and we question, we will find irrefutable answers about the questions of life, and we can prove it 100% objectively, where there's no debate, no question about it. He rejected that. He believed that there was no true objective truth. He believed that, yes, there is a world out there. There are certain natural phenomena which exist in the world. However, the world either has no inherent consistent order to it, where, as people in modern thought would believe, there's determinism. The world follows a certain determined preset ways of functioning. He would say that either the world does not have that set order, or if it does, humans are unable to fully understand it 100% to the T, to the point where they could control it. He was largely influenced by Socrates, but largely rejected Socrates. He really much embraced pagan Greek ideology. He embraced their way of life and their belief system in following their passions, just doing what felt right to them, following what their passion guided them to do. And he felt that Greek philosophy was very restrictive. Its objective was to restrict the passions, to have people suppress their desires. And he viewed that through this view of an objective world, people will try to create systems to protect themselves from the hardship of this world, right? But he believed that, you might develop some sort of system which may temporarily protect you from the hardship of this world, but the key point is that it will be inherently temporary, because this world is inherently chaotic, it's inherently very harsh, and suffering is a natural part of life. And eventually, your system will at some point collapse, it'll some point fall apart, and then your whole worldview will be lost. So he believed if an individual is unwilling to kind of give up on this worldview that they're embracing to try to protect themselves from the chaos of the world, then their whole ego, their whole conscience will be crushed. So he believed that, there is no objective truth. You create your own truth. Right? There's no set objective truth. Truth is as anyone defines it. So all these people who created all these systems to protect the world from the harshness of reality, these systems were not objectively true, but they were true to that person, right? And he was not necessarily against this. He said, this world is inherently chaotic and inherently has no objective truth, but in order to give meaning to it, in order to make it meaningful and give us a sense of purpose, we need to create our own meaning. And He believed that the pagan Greeks, the tragic Greeks as he called them, were very apt at doing this. They were great at doing this. They didn't suppress their passions. They went with what meant something to them. They had this concept of all their gods, Zeus and Apollo and Athena, and they knew that it wasn't objectively true, but it gave them meaning, and they lived by those concepts and those beliefs because it gave them meaning. And they embraced this. And then when their particular worldview maybe no longer was serving the purpose that it was intended to serve, which was to give their life meaning, they were able to roll with the punches and create a new worldview, so that their ego or their whole sense of self will not be crushed when the system that their world was based around collapses. So in essence, in this topic that we're discussing of ideology, you could say that the postmodernism that was started by Nietzsche believed that all of these ideologies that we've seen before were created by people who possess what they call the will to power. They were these strong-willed minds who would create their own ideology and their own worldview, and through this passion that they had and this will to power, this strong will that they had, would propagate these ideologies. And he believed that Socrates also was one of these people who possessed this will to power. He called him an Übermensch, an upper man, the great strong-minded individual who can create their own ideology and propagate it. He believed that Socrates was one of these people as well, but where Socrates went wrong, and where Socrates almost was not telling the truth, was that Socrates projected his belief system and his ideology as being objectively true, while Nietzsche believed that Socrates was fully aware that this was not objectively true. This was his own ideology, which was great because it was a way of giving life meaning, but he felt that Socrates went wrong by trying to present this as objective. And that postmodern ideology is another ideology which in our modern times we view as almost in competition with modernity. Some people would say that it's a threat to our modern way of life. Unlike Marxism, which seeks to add to the ideology of modernity, and in what Marxism believes go further in the direction set forth by modernity, postmodernism is almost a rejection of modernity. So, there you have it. These are all of the major ideologies that have shaped human civilization as we know it. I would argue, based upon everything that I've said, any belief system, any worldview, any way of thinking, any core foundation of a civilization, of a society, every way that a person might view one thing or another is in some way influenced by one or more of these ideologies. All of these together have pretty much laid the foundation for human thought, human civilization as we know it today. So that was my video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was informative. I hope it got you thinking. And I hope maybe even it got you thinking, and maybe you have your own take on it, where maybe you might have your own opinion, which maybe is a little bit different than mine. And I think that's awesome if you do, because we're talking about ideologies here, different belief systems. And I think when thinking in terms of ideas, it's always good to compare and contrast. So that's my video. And there you go. Have a nice day. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to receive a notification every time I release a new video.